We begin our section on religious specialists. And these range from shamans, sorcerers, mediums, priests and priestesses, and prophets, and many more. What do you do when you get sick? There are many considerations that are a part of this, but when we are sick, when we don't feel well, there are some steps that we take whether we realize it or not. Whom do you call? What strategies do you use to get well? What strategies do you use to relieve pain? How do you figure out what made you sick so you don't get sick again? When you are sick, how do you keep others from being affected? How do you feel about getting sick? And is there a social cause of your illness or disease? When we think about all of these things, generally in the West, we tend to think of those things from a medical perspective. But in many other cultures, a religious component is tied into what happens when a person becomes sick. And the answer, whom do you call, in many cases there will be the religious specialist that's a part of that particular culture. And so we'll explore that now and many other aspects of the roles that religious specialists play in the lives of people. We begin by talking about the shaman. The shaman is a Siberian word for part-time specialists with a fairly high status in the community, and they're very often involved in healing. As a matter of fact, curing health problems is most often the goal of the shaman. They do this by entering into a trance or an altered state of consciousness. Oftentimes, a shaman will, in this process, enter into a stage that's called soul flight, where the shaman's soul leaves the body and travels to various places. So what kind of things does a shaman heal? First would be the loss of soul. In a number of cultures, there's the belief that a person's soul might have been stolen, or that the soul, when it left the body at night, it got lost on its way back. And so the cure that the shaman engages in is to restore the soul. We talked about soul flight a minute ago, where the shaman's own soul will leave the body and it will go and travel in search of the lost soul. Shaman also will step in and conduct a cure in the case of intrusion, or where a foreign object or substance enters the body and is believed to be real. Oftentimes the work of sorcerers who transmit from a distance or direct contact. And the cure that the shaman engages in is to remove the object. And we talked about earlier by removing those unwanted things by sucking or scraping, or other techniques or methods that the shaman might have at his or her disposal. And then finally, in cases of possession, where there's an involuntary and undesirable intrusion of a spirit into a person's body, the shaman will step in and perform an exorcism to cure the person. The shaman is believed in many cultures to receive their power and their news directly from the spirit world. So how does a person become a shaman? In many cases, a shaman may be called. In other cases, a shaman may enter into an apprenticeship and they study under the tutelage of an experienced and seasoned shaman. Interestingly enough, Korean shamans are mostly women. And Korean shamans basically function through possession. When she becomes possessed by a spirit, it's when she does her work. And how a Korean shaman becomes one is She is initiated through the healing of possession sickness, that she was possessed by an unwanted entity, and a shaman stepped in, cured her, and in the process, she herself became a shaman and underwent an initiation. Sorcerers we talked about a bit when we were talking about misfortune, and they are oftentimes believed to be the cause of misfortune in many cultures. And sorcerers are those who use magic rituals, magic objects, and other implements for socially unapproved purposes, basically to harm other people. Mediums are those part-time practitioners who are asked to heal and also to divine or bring about hidden information while in a possession trance. That possession trance might include tremors, convulsions, seizures, and even temporary amnesia on the part of the medium. There are also healers who use in their culture traditional medicine. We have Ayurveda from India, Irani from Perso-Arabic cultures, traditional Chinese medicine, traditional Korean medicine, Muti, which is Southern African medicine, and traditional African medicine. And practitioners in those particular disciplines and many more function as healers, and they use many methods that have been passed down and continue to be carried on by the healers in those traditions. There are also herbalists who use plants for medicinal purposes, and there's a great deal of knowledge and a great availability of herbs around the world, and that has been one of the oldest means by which people were cured and healed through the use of plants, medicinal plants and herbs. Diviners are individuals who gain insight into question or a situation through ritual means. We see here, for example, cowrie shells that are popular among many African cultures, and an experienced diviner can read the cowrie shells and be able to tell information. Some people think about people who are palm readers, or people who read tea leaves or runes, or many other ways in which people consult objects in order to gain insight into various questions or situations. There are priests and priestesses who are generally full-time specialists who officiate at public events. Priests and priestesses are sometimes distinguished from other people by special clothing or by wearing a different hairstyle. A person can become a priest either by being appointed one, or it may be an inherited position, depending upon the particular culture. This is important. That is that the priest or priestess depends upon a memorized ritual in many cases that both marks and protects the priest. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. But very often a priest or priestess will rely upon that ritual, and it is a way of distinguishing the priest from other people in the culture, and it also provides them with a measure of protection. The training for priests and priestesses can be very vigorous and long. In some, not all cultures, the material well-being of a priest or priestess is a reflection of their position in the priestly hierarchy. The higher up a person is in that hierarchy, the more things that they will have available to them, more material possessions. If you think about, if we take Roman Catholicism as an example, your parish priest will not have as many possessions in terms of robes, in terms of other elements that are a part of their priestly attire, that if we were to compare them to a bishop, a cardinal, and most certainly the Pope. Even your cardinals and bishops don't have a Pope-mobile, nor the residence at the Vatican. So where one lies in the priestly hierarchy very often corresponds, their material well-being corresponds to that. We talked earlier about the ritual that a priest very often will use that both protects and marks them. And here's how, in terms of protection, this comes into play. If a priest or priestess performs their ritual perfectly and the gods choose not to respond, usually they'll retain their position and the ritual will be assumed to have its effectiveness. But in the case of a shaman, if the shaman repeatedly fails to effect a cure, they lose their following because they're believed to have lost the support of the spirits. In the case of shaman, again, versus priest, in the case of the priest, the non-response of the gods will be explained in terms of the people's unworthiness of supernatural favor. On the other hand, in the case of the shaman, the belief there is that because the shaman has lost his or her effectiveness, the shaman may be run off or even killed if he or she is believed to have lost their effectiveness. In other words, if they thought their mojo is gone, they may lose their life over it. Prophets. As we've seen in the anthropology of religion, there are some terms that are a bit different in their meaning from what we normally think of. Prophets is another example. Within this context, prophets are seen as charismatic founders of new religions who base their teachings on the claim of some type of personal revelation from the supernatural. Generally, what a prophet does is create entire systems of rituals and beliefs from this revelation. Prophets are thought to have divine power to affect natural conditions, cure illness, and also be able to use divination to uncover hidden knowledge. Prophets are said to have divine power that they're able to use while in a trance state. And finally, we turn to ascetics, monks, and mendicants. These are people who primarily separate themselves from the general world. They de-emphasize the pleasures of the world to concentrate on spiritual matters. Ascetics are those who practice strict self-denial. Monks who conduct most of their work in seclusion. And mendicants who take on a vow of poverty as they travel about spreading their teachings and accepting charity from individuals who are inclined to support them. This concludes our section on religious specialists.